If your faith is real, but your life's messy, this is for you. I'm Cece, and you're listening to Savage Jesus. This is for people who love God, but are tired of performing. We talk trauma, addiction, shame, anger, and what real discipleship looks like. Savage Jesus, for the wrecked, the raw, and the rising. Today I'm joined by Kevin Creighton. Kevin's a full-time gunwriter and firearms instructor who's written for just about every firearm-related publication in the United States. His professional life has been spent around conversations about responsibility, discipline, protection, and the realities of force. Kevin was raised in Canada at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains and has traveled extensively throughout Latin America. Those experiences have shaped the way he sees culture, masculinity, faith, and the way men navigate the world. He's also the author of the novel Salvation, a story that follows a retired Army Ranger and bodyguard named John Rogers. The novel explores themes of justice, vengeance, redemption, and faith, as both the hero and the villain are forced to confront who they really are and whether they can become different men by the end of the story. Kevin has strong views about masculinity in the modern world. He believes men today have lost direction and purpose, leaving what he calls a generation of 40-year-old boys instead of mature men. Today we're going to talk about masculinity, redemption, and the arc of transformation in storytelling, and what it means to wrestle with faith in a complicated world. Kevin, I'm really glad you're here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I think just before we get into the book and your journey, could you tell us a little bit about your life today? What does a normal day look like for you?
Well, right now, my day is a little bit unnormal. I was let go from my firearms writing job back in October, and I'm currently working as a substitute teacher. So I'm teaching elementary school age kids, kindergarten through grade 5, how to use computers. So it's a little different than my normal routine. When I was a writer, I worked from home. So it was a lot of, these days, if you're just a writer, you're kind of behind the curve.
Right.
You need to become a content creator. So my day when I was a full-time writer, I would do everything from, sit down and bang out 1,500 words on a topic, to set up a studio inside a spare bedroom we have here and take pictures, to edit some video, to arrange other stories. It was all just, every day was different. A friend of mine a number of years ago said, once your content becomes digital, it doesn't matter what format it's in. So while I wrote the book, and the book's great, the book I think is part of that whole analog resurgence that we're seeing now, where vinyl is outselling CDs and streaming.
Yeah.
So I think hardbound books or paperback books are making a comeback. So that's definitely part of it. But when it comes to digital, you've got to be able to play in any number of sandboxes.
Yeah. So you've spent years writing about firearms and teaching people how to handle them responsibly. What drew you into that world in the first instance?
I was never not a person who, was kind of that side of things. What really kicked it off, though, was back in 2006. We were living in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was a quite dangerous place to live because there was a number of human smuggling gangs that were fighting for turf in the city. And my wife and I were watching in the evening news, and there was a report of a very violent home break-in that happened in her old neighborhood.
Right.
And it's a neighborhood that I knew as well. There's a really good Mexican food place about a mile and a half away from where it happened.
Yeah.
And it's like, we looked at that, we went, they kidnapped a 3-year-old boy during this home invasion. The boy was recovered, a couple hours later, but at the time our oldest son was 3 years old, and we knew that neighborhood, both of us. We went, that could happen to us. They mix up the numbers, and all of a sudden it's our door that gets broken down. So we that kind of brings it home. She said, I want an alarm system, which we got. And I said, I want a firearm. So I went to my local gun range and I just rented everything from, and that they had available to shoot from point A to point B. And I started writing about it. And then The rest is geography. I'm not a natural, I never served in the military. I never grew up hunting, blah, 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 all those different, normal sidearms. I just realized that at the end of the day, the police are second responders. The first
Yeah.
responder is the intended victim of the attack. So it's up to you
Right.
to decide what's going to happen in that attack. And I looked at it and I said, I can't see any verse in the Bible that says that I should willingly martyr myself and let bad things happen to my wife and kids. It just doesn't exist. Now,
Mm.
are there stuff that says turn
Mm.
the other cheek? Absolutely. But you know what? That verse says nothing about, hey, when a person's stabbing you, don't stab back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think just in terms of perception and the way people look at gun culture, especially in America, and coming from a country where we've got very different gun laws, what do you think people misunderstand most about gun culture coming from outside of where you come from?
Well, I grew up in Canada. I grew up
Mm.
in Western Canada. The first time I saw a pistol that was not carried by law enforcement, it was like a big old 6-shooter, Wyatt Earp, like, 7-inch long barrel that somebody had strapped to their waist, because Arizona
Yeah,
had open carry of pistols since before Arizona was a state. It's where,
right.
Tombstone and OK Corral
Yeah.
happened. So it's like, I went kind of, ha, I'm not in Canada anymore, am I? I think there's two things that are going on. Number one, there are a number of subcultures in America that are very, very toxic. You have to
Yeah.
look at the density of certain areas where the fact of the matter is, if you took out 4 cities, LA, DC, New York, and Chicago, if you took those stats out,
Hmm.
America would be in the middle of the pack when it comes to violence and safety in the developed world. That's
Right.
just statistics. But I think, there's a great line from a Neil Young song that says, the same things that make you live will kill you in the end.
Mm.
The independence and drive and the lack of self-awareness that Americans have. Remember, I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
Americans don't understand that certain things can't be done.
Right.
The rest of the world goes, well, you can't land a capsule on the moon. America goes, oh, just watch us, you know. So that lack of self-awareness is both
Yeah.
their strength and their weakness. That lack of self-awareness also
Mm.
applies to, well, you're not, I need to be in charge of my own personal safety. I don't trust the government in order to do that. And to be fair,
Yeah.
let's face it, there are a lot of times when
Yeah.
you don't want the government to trust you,
Mm.
your safety. The history
Yeah.
is filled with
Yeah.
examples of minorities getting oppressed. I look
Yeah.
at them this way.
Yeah.
There's a shirt that goes around American gun culture right now. It says, all gun control is racist.
Yeah.
And that's tough. And I realized, yeah, that's also accurate. You look at
Mm.
the history of gun control in America, it's all about making sure that the right people, not those other people out there, the ones that we are not
Yeah.
talking about, the good people here,
Yeah. Yeah.
do not have the ability to say, no, I don't like you doing that.
Mm.
So it is a two-edged sword. You get stuff and you give stuff up. The same things that make America great drive its gun culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an interesting perspective. So you said you grew up in Canada near the Rocky Mountains and you've traveled extensively in Latin America. How did those experiences shape the way you see the world today?
Oh boy, all sorts of ways. You'll see it. You'll see that at least in the United States, there is a overrepresentation of Canadians and Jewish people in comedy clubs, and that's because we are both in American culture but not of American culture.
Mm.
So I have kind of like an outsider's view of what's going on in America, even though I'm in it. I'm like, I didn't
Yeah.
marinate in this growing up, but it
Yeah.
definitely gave me the ability to pause and step outside myself and kind of look at my life from another perspective, going, is that core belief that I actually have, is that actually true? And from what would that look like from a third party perspective? And so it allowed me to, I want to say less, what's the word I'm looking for? Personally attached to my core beliefs and allow me to build core beliefs based on their effectiveness rather than my personal attachment to them.
Yeah. So how did those environments influence the way you think about strength, responsibility, and the big topic, masculinity?
Well, I mean, you got to understand I'm from Calgary. Calgary's kind of Dallas's attitude with Denver's location, if you want to place it. Alberta is the Texas of Canada.
Yeah.
So Every summer, Calgary hosts the Calgary Exhibition and Stampede. It's the largest outdoor rodeo on earth. So it's a masculine culture up there. That's thing number one. Thing number two is I grew up reading, stories, by people like, Ian Fleming doing the James Bond novels, and John D. MacDonald with his stuff. And then also reading things like, the theologian Francis Schaeffer and his stuff,
Yeah.
and C.S. Lewis, and all
Yeah.
these great heroic, and honestly, reading the stories of like World War I flying aces, these, people who would go up and fly in these little piano wire and, cloth lawnmower engine powered airplanes to do one-on-one battle with the Germans. And like,
Yeah.
the idea of being a hero and, standing for something and saying,
Yeah.
no, on this rock, I will stand. It's always fascinated me.
So you talked about reading a lot of books growing up. So let's talk about your book, Salvation. What was the original idea that sparked that story?
The original idea that sparked that story is I'd be reading all these books, like the Ian Fleming Bond books. I've been rereading them recently. They are tremendously well written. I mean, just you read some of the stuff and go, oh, that's why it's popular. But then there's also some parts in there where you go, wow, that was really cringe. Yeah, that was maybe potentially a little bit racist and a little bit misogynist.
Yeah.
Okay, take that back. A lot racist and a lot
Yeah.
misogynist.
Yeah.
But we're applying the filters of today to that, So it'd be like me roughly saying, boy, I can't believe why Beethoven did put electric guitars in the Ninth Symphony. I don't understand why he did that. No, that was back
Yeah.
then. This is now. Okay. But there are other authors like that. Raymond Chandler would be one. Robert B. Parker, probably my favorite author. They all would, or Mickey Spillane, his stuff, where they would write about tough guys doing, making hard choices in a very unseeming world. And then they would say, and that's when we took off our clothes and I jumped into bed with her.
Yeah.
And as a person of faith, I kind of, whoop, time out. Okay, you lost me there.
Yeah.
And so I said, why is nobody writing a book like that? So I said, well, you're a writer, Kevin, get to work. That's the story of it. It took me about 5 years to get the whole thing done.
Yeah.
I kind of changed the hero 3 times and the venue twice. And then a good friend of mine, John Gabriel, who was also, we grew up together, and he's also a writer, a very, very good one. He's better than me. He mentioned to me about 3 years ago he was going to start a novel.
Yeah.
And then a year ago he said, I'm finished. And I said, okay, well, fine, go ahead. I've been working on mine for 5 years. You've been working yours for 3. I'll get mine done. And that's how I finished it.
So tell us a bit about the character John Rogers and the kind of man he is when the story begins.
He is the kind of man he is. He is a man who has devoted himself to causes his entire life. The first being a member of the Ranger Recon Detachment, which is a special unit inside the Rangers. It's not one. It's what's called a Tier 1 level outfit. So the same people as Delta Force, the high Navy SEALs, that tip of the spear, but nobody knows about them. So I said, okay, I want to write about that, because everybody writes about Navy SEALs. And
yeah.
But he's a man who's dedicated himself to a variety of causes his entire life, and now he finds himself without a cause. And as a result, he's a little bit rudderless. And I've seen this same person, because I know a lot of people in the military. I've seen the same person over and over again who spend their career, military people, they're really good at being a soldier. But once that external structure falls away, they don't have the internal structure to maintain a healthy life, and they just disintegrate. They, alcoholism, bad debt, blah, 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 you name it. They needed that external prop in order to maintain a healthy personality.
Sorry.
Yeah. So that's basically where he finds himself. He's like, okay, now what?
Yeah. So you said that your book explores themes of vengeance and justice. Why were those themes in particular important for you to talk about and wrestle with?
That's an interesting question. I never thought of that. I guess it's because we all have a built-in sense of, well, that ain't right.
Yeah.
We all know that we live in a sinful, fallen world, and that stuff happens that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And the question is, okay, now what? And I've always looked at, the difference, and part of it is, okay, am I going to pursue this for personal gain? Am I going to pursue justice for personal gain, or am I going to pursue it on behalf of a third party? And that's a
Yeah.
big, big difference. Because when I see people, out there marching, no justice, and it's something that they have a personal stake in, I'm kind of like, you're
Yeah.
not asking for justice. You're
Yeah.
asking for revenge.
Right.
Justice is something that a judge hands out. A third party says, this is what's going to happen, dudes.
Yeah.
Revenge or vengeance is something I want. I won't be satisfied until this happens. The
Yeah.
problem with that is you can never get enough of that because
Yeah.
something is always going to go wrong. We're seeing that happen right now in society where, I won't be happy until you change. And my response is, I am never going to change enough in order for you to be happy.
Be happy, yeah. That's actually really interesting, that perspective of the difference between justice and vengeance. But also you talk about your hero and the villain on a journey of self-discovery. So why was it important to you that both men had to change by the end of the story?
Because a good hero is nothing without a good villain.
Okay.
I mean, that's just the fact of the matter is. Bond had Blofeld, you have to have that, and a good villain has to have something in it to go, actually he's right there. The perfect example of that would be the Matrix movies.
Yeah.
Where the Agent Smith says humans are a disease. And yeah, we do. We're kind of sucky when it comes to that.
Yeah.
You kind of like, I kind of agree with you there, but
Yeah.
you're bad. No, I can't agree with you because you're bad. And that's kind of the same way with this. My villain also lives by a moral code. It's a very twisted moral code,
Yeah.
and he wants the best for his people. But in order to get that, other people have to suffer.
Yeah.
And so there's that parallel arc. And it's interesting, a number of friends of mine have picked up on this, that there's a parallel arc going on between
Yeah.
two people who end up as changed people at the end of it. And honestly, I did not write that into it. But
Right.
now I look back on it going, oh yeah, that's kind of cool.
So you were talking about the arc in the story just now. What does the arc actually say about human nature?
I believe that, faith hat on. There are basically two different ways of looking at the world, that human beings can change and redeem themselves without supernatural intervention, and that human
Yeah.
beings can change and redeem themselves without that. I look at it this way. If you want, I go back to my days as a chemistry nerd in high school. If you want, let's go back to, let's go back further than that. Let's go to Newton's second law of motion. An object will remain in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. So if you truly want to change yourself as a person, Newton's second law says you cannot do that.
Yeah.
That the only way you can affect change in your life is if an outside force affects you. And if it's another person, that's not going to be enough. You need to be able to hook on to a source of strength that can provide energy into the system. Human beings cannot do that. All we can do is provide the same level of energy that me as a human being has. It has to be a literal supernatural source.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the difference, between somebody who, let's face it, that's what AA says. We can't do this by ourselves.
Yeah.
And AA is very, very good at curing people of very bad habits.
Yeah. Yeah. So you talked about faith through all of this, and I know that faith is an underlying theme in your book. What role does faith actually play in the lives of your characters?
In all those books that I talked about, there comes a point where, especially in John D. McDonald's books, which are just fantastic, they're set in Florida, and they're just so. Kurt Vonnegut said that he was one of the best writers ever in America. And if Kurt Vonnegut says you're a good writer, you go, okay, he's probably a good writer.
Okay.
But there comes a point in his books where you see the person pontificate on a subject, and Ian Fleming did it as well in his books.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, here's me as the author interjecting my beliefs into this through my characters. And I said, well, heck, I'm a Christian. Why can't I do that? And here's me as an author interjecting, my beliefs on how this person needs to, reset his life and do that as a basis of a Christian conversion. And what's been really good about this, I have a lot of friends who are not Christian going, look, hey, he wrote it well. It's not my faith belief, but he was honest about it.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. But you also described your book as faith adjacent rather than traditional faith fiction. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Because faith-based brings baggage with it.
Yeah.
Faith-based means that I'm not going to use any cuss words, that it's going to be clean, that it's going to be something that the pastor could use as a study guide, that, Kirk Cameron could star in. Kirk's
Yeah.
nothing against him. He's got his niche. Go for it.
Yeah.
It also means that it's sanitized.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it has no, for want of a better word, dangerous elements. I grew up inside the Christian church,
Yeah.
3 times a week. Wednesday night Bible study, Friday night youth groups, then church twice on, Sunday school, church, and then evening service on Sundays. That
Yeah.
was my
Yeah.
life for my first
Yeah.
18 years. And I never was tested during that.
Right.
Tested by stuff that was outside of the church. And I live in Florida, and the trees here in Florida, I'm looking at, a pair of palm trees outside here because it's Florida.
Yeah.
Palm trees are ideally suited for hurricane areas because when a hurricane
Yeah.
hits, they lose a few fronds. No big deal.
Yeah.
While the trees that we bring down here
Mm.
blow over in the wind because they are not used to the constant.
Yeah.
In fact, they found that, back in Arizona, I lived 30 years in Arizona. There's a place out there called Biosphere 2,
Yeah.
which is an indoor, ecology test. And they found
Mm.
that the trees that they grew there fell over because there was no
Yeah.
wind to help them grow strong roots and strong trunks. And I
Right.
think that's a problem that American Christianity in particular has a big problem with. When I lived in Costa Rica, I had a family I was staying with said, it must be easy to be a Christian in America. I said, it's easy to say you're a Christian,
Mm.
but it's
That's
actually
interesting.
quite difficult to go out and say, and I'm a Christian, and you're going to be able to tell the difference in my life from the lives of those around me. That's actually really tough to do.
Yeah. So, with your book and the books that you've read and the things that we're talking about, do you sometimes think that stories communicate spiritual truths better than sermons on a Sunday?
Yeah, absolutely. Read the Bible. When Christ wanted to pound something into the head of his apostles, he would use a story. He'd use a parable. And even then, Peter would go, hey, Jesus, I got a question. And you see all the other apostles going, shut up, Peter, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. And then he was the guy that Christ turned around and said, okay, you're in charge now.
Yeah.
So it is definitely that, because there's a story allows us to connect on an emotional level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus reading. I mean, I'm reading a really good history novel right now, and it's good, but there isn't that emotional connection to it. And that emotions are what change people's lives. First
Yeah.
rule of marketing is you make your decision with your heart and you justify it with your head.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what surprised you the most while you were writing your book, either about yourself or about your characters?
What surprised me, and then this is going to sound dumb, but was how much my years and years and years and years of, right now, if my mom's listening to this, she'll go, and years more of playing tabletop role-playing games helped me write the book.
Right.
When I was a young kid, I got heavily involved in Dungeons and Dragons to the point where I took grade 11 twice. I skipped all my classes.
Right.
What it allowed, don't. Kids, if you're listening to this, don't do that. It's dumb. But what it allowed me to do was to create characters and build storylines. Tabletop role-playing is interactive fiction.
Yeah.
Your dungeon master says, here's the environment you're in, go react. So now I have the environment, the opportunity to be both dungeon master and player, where I
Yeah.
create my character and characters and turn them loose. And I'm going, well, I wasn't expecting them to do that, but that's kind of cool. All right, we'll write that
Yeah.
instead. And that's kind of the way I write. I come up with the idea of a character and I just play around. I tug on that thread and see what happens to them.
Yeah. Do you think people are drawn to the story of redemption? And why do you think people tend to get drawn to redemption, if that's what you think with the book or with stories?
Yeah, redemption, because we all like to think that we can be better people. And
Yeah.
I am a better person. I'm a better person right now than I was, obviously, when I was skipping classes. But,
Yeah.
I keep, and my wife, who's sitting over there, she's heard me say this over and over again, that the life I'm living was not the life that I was supposed to have. The life that I
Right.
was supposed to have was a shy, quiet, lonely nerd
Mm.
living inside myself. And yet here I am, spent 6 years as a full-time writer, traveled to Ecuador and Costa Rica and all over Mexico and all these different places, and done all these things and married an amazing woman. I have 2 great kids. It's like, this is not supposed to be my life when I was 17. I was never imagine this
Yeah.
happened to me. So we like to be able to say, I can do better than this.
Yeah.
And that's what the redemption story is. And
Yeah,
it's God
that's
saying, look, you're not born. I made you
yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Let's change that.
So just going back to masculinity, I know I'm just kind of veering off topic a little bit, but I do want to talk a bit more about this. You've spoken about the idea that we're seeing too many 40-year-old boys in modern culture. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. Because I think sometime around 1965 or so, the world discovered that there was a group of people out there who had a lot of money. They all got part-time jobs and no responsibilities. Oh,
Mm,
goody. That means they'll spend money foolishly. And they did for 40
yeah,
years, 50 years. And all of a sudden, now the tab is coming due. There are people I know who have kids my age. My kids are 20 and 22.
yeah,
And the dad in their life spent their entire time trying to be as cool as the 14-year-olds were. That was
right,
his way of getting to, rather than set an example of how to be a man, he spent his
yeah,
time trying to relive his childhood. So
right.
those poor kids, I feel so bad for them because they are not going to know how to act as a
Mm,
40-year-old. We've popularized and rewarded escaping from responsibility, be it through quick and easy divorces, be it
yeah,
through, abuse of alcohol, over-sexualization of women,
yeah,
the abandonment of not doing something because it's not, don't do it not because you'll get caught, but don't do it because it's the right thing for you to
yeah,
do, not to
yeah,
do it. The
yeah.
sake of, for want of a better word, honor.
Mm,
We've unfortunately associated that with a lot of negative things. And there are, of course, negative things associated with it. There's negative things associated with anything. I just had a
yeah,
hot fudge sundae after lunch. It's one of the greatest things in the world. Are there negative things associated with that? Yes, it's called getting
yeah,
fat. But so we've emphasized one
yeah.
thing to the detriment of the benefits of that, of being able to put boundaries on our behavior
Mm,
that limit the amount of pain we cause other people. And
yeah,
we are going to pay the price for that. There's just, you
yeah,
cannot escape that. There's a great poem from Kipling, The Gods of the Copybook Headings, where, it's like, hey, we're going to try this. And you go, well, tried it before. Let's see what happens. And the last line is, and the gods of the copybook headings with terror and slaughter return. And I'm
yeah,
like, yeah, you can try it. We've done it before. Chesterton's Fence is another way of looking at this. I'm a big fan
yeah.
of Chesterton's Fence, where it's like you walk around you're walking down a country lane and you see a fence.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like,
Mm,
why the heck is there a fence there? This is an open country lane. This is stupid. There shouldn't be a fence there. Let's tear it down. You should pause. You think, okay, why would somebody put a fence there? Oh,
yeah,
okay, that makes sense. Yeah, let's keep it for that reason.
yeah. So, do you think there's a role of responsibility and discipline that play when a man becomes a man rather than just, he's grown older, so now we kind of call him a man?
Yeah, absolutely. There's and to be honest, part of that for me was when I started to carry a firearm on a regular basis,
Right.
because it removed any sort of right I had to be angry. We get angry. I read this recently. I went, oh, that's nice. Where we get angry when something happens that we feel shouldn't have happened.
Mm,
That's the source of our anger.
yeah,
Yeah, that's good. A perfect example is, you shouldn't have cut me off in traffic.
yeah,
Your mother is this, your mother is that, blah, 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 blah,
yeah,
and then accidents
yeah,
happen.
exactly.
Or worse out here, and especially in America, road rage.
Yeah,
But since I've carried a firearm on a regular basis, I'm a much calmer person. I don't do that.
that's
I am
interesting.
much
Yeah,
less angry because I know that I have the ability to end any incident, any argument, anything that might pop up, anything that I don't like, in my favor. You say
right.
that to me? Fine. Bam.
Yeah,
There, I ended the argument, right? but
Yeah.
I'm going to jail for the rest of my life.
Mm.
So I look at it and going, yeah, that reward ain't worth that risk.
Yeah.
Let
Yeah.
it go, Kevin. It's not a big deal. Yes, he's an idiot. Yes, he should have used his blinker. Just let it go.
Yeah. So, what do you think true masculinity looks like? And where do you think
Interesting.
young men today are losing direction?
Where young men are losing a trajectory is the breakup of the traditional family, quite frankly, or even the
Yeah.
non-traditional family. I think the
Yeah.
extended family, like we see in a lot of cultures, is actually like, yeah, that's kind of cool, actually. I mean, I grew up with my
Mm.
grandmother living in my house because, the whole point of having lots of kids is they took care of you when you're old. We've let the tyranny of short-term goals take precedence over the long term. I was working
Yeah.
in a job where there was a guy little bit younger than me, about 10
Hmm.
years younger than me, and he and his wife, no plans to get kids. And the other two people that we were working with, they both had kids. And he was like, I don't understand why you guys got kids. I got so much money and stuff like this. And I said, well, the future belongs to those who show up.
Yeah.
And so I have two children. I have a stake in the future. That is that is by its very nature,
Yeah.
long-term planning. I've created something that's going to outlast me.
Yeah.
And most people, I think not most people, but a lot of people these days don't see a child as a legacy.
Mm.
They see it as, at most time, quite frankly, as an inconvenience.
Yeah.
I was a lot happier before I had kids. I was a lot I know people, I mean, I've heard stories. I haven't heard it personally, but how many times you heard somebody say, people will tell their kids that.
Yeah.
I was a lot happier before we had kids, before we had you.
Yeah.
What a horrible thing to say.
Mm. Yeah. So, what does true masculinity look like in your mind?
True masculinity in my mind, okay, let's go back to, I'm Scots Irish, so of course I'm going to bring the Protestant work ethic into it. It means not being lazy.
Mm.
It means doing the hard thing. There was a book that changed my life, The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And the opening line to it was a Buddhist line, quite frankly. It says, life is suffering. And all the Buddhists go, yeah, we get that. And then he turns it around and says, but realizing that life is suffering makes life easy. Anyway, give me a second here. Let me digest that. Once you understand that the hardest choice you have, when you're looking at a bunch of things to do, the hardest choice is probably the correct choice.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden life becomes a lot easier. Tougher, but
Yeah.
easier because you're making the
Yeah.
hard choice. But then you understand, but yes, that's the better choice.
Yeah.
And we've avoided that. There was this dumb things I pick up and that affect my life, but there was like a radio spot for a car insurance company that I once heard. It was like the local DJ saying, hey, if you're like me, you like to do things the easy way. I'm like, no, not
Yeah.
always. The easy thing for me is not to load the dishwasher and do dishes. That's easy.
Yeah.
You do
But
you
is
do
it the
the
right
right
thing?
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
in the words of Spike Lee, you do the right thing.
Yeah. Did you see examples of that kind of masculinity growing up? The good masculinity that we talked about.
Yes and no.
Mm.
Yeah, I did. My dad made a lot of sacrifices for me,
Yeah.
but in many ways, I had to overcome his inherent, I want to say laziness, but laziness I think is
Yeah.
the right word. And both my brother and I have talked about this, that we both, had to find role models outside of our families for hard work. I found it
Yeah.
working for another photographer who showed me how to do it. And my brother found it with his father-in-law. But there's that thing of sacrifice where you go to work, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, come home and extend yourself. And I think, that's the best way to do it, because if we define love as extending ourselves to another person for that person's benefit, be that emotionally, financially, whatever, that positive example is, I'm doing this for you because I know it's the best thing for you. Not the
Yeah.
best thing for me. The best thing for me would be to just, I'm out of here. But extend yourself and sacrifice. Sacrifice, I think, is the biggest thing. If that's the biggest
Yeah.
thing.
And what do you think men are most afraid of admitting today? Growing up in the culture that we've grown up in and the examples we've seen around us.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think right now, well, men have always been afraid to say I'm weak. Always. I
Yeah.
mean, that goes back
Yeah.
to, I mean,
Yeah.
good grief,
Yeah.
read the account of King David. He was the same way.
Yeah.
And this was a man that God said, yeah, you're like me in a lot of ways. So I think that's number one. But I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing, at least in America, and I don't know this in other cultures, is the lack of, for want of a better word, safe spaces for men.
Yes. Yeah.
We've had a lot of, in our history, there were a lot of places where men could go to be men. And
Mm.
not like, toxic masculinity, blah, 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 blah. Just say, okay, I can drop my guards, I can let down 3 or 4 layers of
Mm.
my armor and be real with y'all because I know you're doing that with me. The Elks Club, the Moose Lodge,
Yeah.
VFW. We had for 150 some odd years when men would come back from the battlefield and come back with these huge emotional scars because we asked them to do awful, awful things in defense of our society.
Mm.
They would be scarred by that. Duh.
Yeah.
And they could come back to a place and say, look, I need to recover from this in the company of people who understand what I went through.
Yeah.
And the vets in World War II had that. The vets in Vietnam kind of sort of had that. But our current crop of
Yeah.
veterans don't have that. And that's why in America, at least, we're seeing these horrific suicide rates among
Yeah. Yeah.
veterans. That's the number one source of gun violence right now in America is suicide.
Yeah. You talked a bit about the Buddhist saying about suffering. Do you think redemption requires suffering?
Redemption requires acknowledging that you are suffering. Absolutely. You cannot say,
Right.
everything's going great. I don't need you, God.
Yeah.
Everything's cool.
Yeah.
It took me a
Yeah.
long time. There's a verse in Matthew that talks about the unpardonable sin on denying the Holy Spirit. And I struggled with that because like, oh no,
Yes.
have I denied the Holy Spirit today? I don't
Yep.
know. Oh
Yeah.
gosh, I don't know. And then I realized recently that verse actually talks about you going to God saying, I don't need you, God. And God saying,
Yes.
you're right, you don't.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
unpardonable sin, and that's just like, which is funny because then, 2000 years later, Freud said, you have to want to change first. And God's
Yes.
going, yeah, nice. You picked up on that, didn't you? You know,
Yeah. So just going back and talk, the book and masculinity and all of that. If someone reads your book today, remembering only one idea, what would you want them to remember? What's that one thing you want them to take away from it?
buy the next one.
Yeah.
I'm a capitalist. No, what's the one thing I want to take about that? It's never too late to change.
Right.
Oh, God can't accept me. I can't change because of all the things I've done in my life. Like, do you really think you've committed a sin that God hasn't seen? Really?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as
Yeah.
original sin. It's all been done before.
Yeah. And if someone was stuck in a life that wasn't something that they were hoping for or expected, what advice would you give them?
If someone's stuck in a life, like if they're like down in their life and they feel I need to get out of this, is that your question?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
different perspectives. So, you know how you said at the start, we talked about how you didn't expect to be where you are right now with your wife and kids. And people can sometimes get stuck in a life going, whether it's being stuck in addiction or being stuck in a rut or mentally, you're just going,
Right.
I'm kind of stuck. I don't know. I don't have a way out. What advice would you give them?
2 things. Number 1, be aware of grace. Be aware that there's times where the stars of the universe or God or blah, blah, blah. Well, I believe in God, so I'm going to say God because that happened in my life. That's what got me out of it. Through a weird series of coincidences, translation, they weren't coincidences.
Yep.
I got an opportunity to work as a photographer in Ecuador for 3 months.
Mm.
Not bad for a 25-year-old kid, and that was me acknowledging going, okay, I get it. Thanks.
Yeah.
I took the hint. You want me to change. Got it. But that's number 1. Number 2 is choose the harder option.
Right.
Choose the harder option. When in doubt, choose the harder option because it's going to result in the most growth.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Well, I already talked about buying my book, right? No,
Yep.
no,
And I'll put the link in the bio as well, so people know how to get in touch.
there's a line from that a friend of mine talked, and I just love it. It says, don't let your desire Because one of the problems I see out there is, don't be afraid to follow your dreams,
Yeah.
Do so reasonably. Don't go to your wife and 3 kids, "I'm leaving you to become a surfer in Malibu." Probably not the right thing to do, but
Yeah.
find the joy. Find those moments of joy that just go, "Oh, I needed that to refresh my soul."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kevin, thank you for sharing your perspective today. Your story reminded me that redemption is really simple. It's often messy, uncomfortable, and requires people to confront parts of themselves that they'd rather avoid. And
Right.
I'm talking about myself at that point. But those are the moments that's where real change happens. So thank you very much for being part of the conversation today. And I'll put your link to your book in the bio, and just, anywhere people can get in touch with you if they need to know more as well. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening. This has been Cece, and this is Savage Jesus. If something in this episode named what you've been carrying, don't rush past it. And if you want more of this, like, share, and follow Savage Jesus for the wrecked, the raw, and the rising.